Okay, we're working through our Reversi application and we're still trying to build out the first half of our lobby. The first half of our lobby interaction we started in a previous video, and in this video, what I want to tackle is changing some of the join room behavior. My name is Professor Don Patterson. All right, so we want to tackle some things in this particular video. We want to update our join room process. And what we want to do is when we join a room, we want our server to keep track of the players that are joining the room so that we can keep track of all the players that we have when we have several people in the lobby. So we're going to do that on the server side. And then we're going to update the disconnect process as well so that we announce when players depart. And that'll be helpful for being able to announce in the chat and get rid of invite buttons when people leave the lobby, etc. So we're going to fix the disconnect on our server side, and then on the client side, we're going to announce in our chat that players have in fact departed. So let's start by looking at the join room process. And I'm going to go ahead and switch to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to go to server.js because it's server side and we want to keep track of the players that are joining and keep track of them in a dictionary and record them when they join. All right, so in server.js, we're going to go to the very top. And what we want to do is we want to add the ability to keep track of our players when they join. So we look at the top of our file. The first thing that happens is we set up our web server. The ability to have our static files served. We set up an HTTP port, different depending on whether we're localhost or Heroku. Set up our file, we create our app, and then we log that our server's running. Then we set up our WebSocket server, and I think what we want to do is right before this, I guess it doesn't matter whether we do it before or after, but we're just going to put a note in here that says we're going to set up a registry of players, of player information and their socket IDs. And so we're just going to keep track of that in a data structure called players. So we'll create it with let players and we'll set it equal to square brackets. That'll be a data structure that we use to hold that information. Now what we need to do is we need to go down and we need to do our second bullet, which is to adjust how we keep track of people when they join. So in our join room handler, when a client connects to our server, we do a couple things. We check to make sure that the data that's coming in is good. So we adjust the payload. We check that the room that the player wants to join is good and that their username is good. And if they do all those things correctly, we have them join the room and then we check to make sure that they're in the room. If there's some sort of problem, we send an error message back. But if everything is okay, then we go ahead and we need to broadcast who's in the room. So we need to do a couple fixes here to what happens when someone successfully joins the room. Okay, so let's see, what do we have to do? We've checked the payload. We've checked the payload content already. Let's go ahead and remove this server log message. That's not so critical anymore since things are working okay. And the first thing that we want to do after we realize that that it has gone okay, let's see, where do we want to do this? Let's go ahead and do it down here if everyone joined okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to say players, this is where we register them, square bracket, socket, period ID, square bracket, it's going to equal curly bracket, and we're going to create a little data structure to keep track of them. We're going to keep track of their username, and we'll use the variable username that we've already collected from them. And we're going to keep track of their room, and we're going to use the room that we've already collected for them. And those need to end with first one needs to end with a comma, comma, comma. The second one doesn't need anything after it. And then our response that we're going to send back is going to be, we actually need to change this so that we send our response back to everyone. Now that we have everyone joining our room, we need to make a little loop. And this loop is going to announce to everyone that is in the room who else is in the room. We're going to make a little loop. We're going to say for constant member in socket. So we're going to go through each one of the sockets that's been connected to this room. And we're going to make a response, but let's do it a little differently here. Let's go ahead and build it on the fly. It's a little easier to see that way. Our result is going to be colon success, end it with a comma, and then our room going to be colon players submember.id.room. So we're going to use the data structure that we've created in order to get the room. The username is going to be player member ID username. Players member ID username, good. And the count is still going to be sockets.length, and we'll have a colon there as well, and with a comma. All right, let me see what else we're missing. We've got our result, we've got our room, we've got our username, we've got our count, and we need our socket ID. That's the last thing we need to say which socket just joined. And that's going to be member.id. We get to the end of that, and that should be everything. We'll take that data structure and we will send it to everyone in the room, and we will log that it worked and what we sent out. All right, so that looks pretty good. The only thing I want to do is I want to change our message up here at the top of this response, socket.onJoinRoom. I want to say that our response is going to include the socket ID, just as documentation. The socket of the user that just joined the room. This is just a comment, but it's to keep everything neat and tidy. All right. So what we were working on right there was keeping track of players in a dictionary. We did that with the players data structure, and we're recording them when they join. I think we did that okay. Now what we want to do is we want to update the disconnect process so that when we disconnect, we also tell users who's disconnected. All right. And just kind of for organization purposes, I'm going to move this. I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to move it down to the bottom of the join room handler. It kind of makes more sense to first list what you do when you join the room, and then list what you do when you leave the room. So before the send chat message, but after that, after the join room. All right, previously all we did was logged a message that someone disconnected. But what we need to do now is we need to check to see, we need to let everyone know that someone is disconnected. So we have our socket ID, so we want to check to see if we have record of them in our data structure that we're keeping track of. So we're going to check to see if the type of players, square bracket, socket.id, if this is not equal to undefined, so we're looking for a good case, undefined in a string, and two ampersands, players subsocket.id is not equal to the string null. No, not the string null, just regular null. And then we need a square bracket after socket.id, and then two parentheses at the end, and then curly brackets for what we're going to do if everything is good. And if everything is good, then we're going to create a new payload object. And we're going to send some information back. We're going to send the username. Let's put all the things that we're going to send, and then we'll fill them in. We'll send the username. We'll send the room of who's disconnecting and which room they're disconnecting from, and how many people are left in the room, and what the socket ID was that just disconnected. Socket. All right, great. So now let's go ahead and fill them in. The username of the player that's leaving is players socket square bracket socket dot ID square bracket dot username. And same thing, but instead we're going to do room. And then the number of people that are left in the room is the number of things that are in our players data structure. So we check that by saying object.keys square bracket players, sorry, not square brackets, parentheses. And it's the length, but we're going to subtract 1 from it because of the person that's in the process of leaving. We want each one of these lines to end with a comma. I naturally put a semicolon at the end, but it should be a comma. And then the last thing is our socket underscore ID is equal to socket.id. Put a semicolon at the end of that, and that's our payload that we're going to send back. Let's go ahead and copy this room line here, and let's make a local variable called room that's equal to the same thing that we set equal to up there. We'll need that in a second. Since this player is disconnected, we're going to delete them from our data structure, players socket.id. We'll just delete that element. My color coding isn't lining up here, so I'm curious what's happening. And I see that the line before it ends with a comma instead of a semicolon. Now my color coding looks good. All right, now we want to tell everyone who left the room. That's a comment. And the way we're going to do that is by sending out a socket.io message. So we'll use io.of parenthesis backslash, I guess that's forward slash, single quote, or double quote, forward slash, double quote, paren, period, to. Which room are we going to send the message to? The room we just figured out. What message are we going to send? We're going to say player disconnected, and we're going to send the payload with that. Payload. And then let's log that everything went okay. Player disconnected succeeded. Space, single quote, and then we'll send the content of what we sent. JSON.stringify, paren, payload, paren. Clean it up. Clean it up. Save it. Looks okay. All right, so that sends a message back when someone disconnects, but we're not doing anything with it. That was server side, announce when a player departs. And on client side, what we want to do is we want to fade in a message saying that the person has in fact departed. We don't have anything right now on the client side that recognizes that message coming back. What message do we need to recognize? We need to recognize player disconnected, this message right here, player disconnected. So let's switch to main.js and let's handle that. What we've got right now that's a lot like it is our join room response, because our join room response goes through and gives us join room response. So let's go ahead and copy this join room response in main.js, duplicate it right below, and instead of handling the join room response, we'll handle the player disconnected message. Make sure you spell it correctly. It's got to be exactly right, exactly the same as what we sent from the server. We'll check to make sure the payload is okay. Check to make sure there wasn't a failure of some kind. Actually, we don't need a fail. Double check that. Nope, we're not sending success or failure because it's not a response, so we can get rid of that. Now, instead of adding the HTML directly, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and create some new HTML. That's good. Oh, so what we have here is the join room response. So we're going to take our new, what was left over, but instead of our join room response, we'll make this our left room response, and still the username, and we'll say left the room, and now there are this many users in the room. Okay, so that's good. We have our new node, we hide it, we prepend it, and we fade it in. Okay, so that should take care of our player disconnecting. Not very different than joining the room, actually. If we go to our check, we say client side, fade in a message saying that they have departed. All right, so let's check to see if this is working for us. Let's make sure that we are running our application. Okay, we've got server running. Everything is running cleanly. We come down here and we'll go back to our beginning. We'll empty our cache and do a hard reload. We'll do this on the other side as well. All right, I'm looking for this fave icon error is okay. That's not a problem. But what I'm looking for is other kinds of errors. So we'll enter the lobby, and the second person enters the lobby. All right, it looks like we had some kind of problem in our server. Let's see what we got in our server. The server says reference error, soccers is not defined, and it looks like it's about line 50. So let's go to line 50 and see if we see it. I don't see it, but I know that the word soccers, I must have mistyped socket somewhere. So let me look for soccers. That would be server.js. So let's look at server.js line 50. I don't see it, but let me look for soccers. There it is. So this, where are we right here? We're in the join room command. on server.js, I accidentally typed in for constant member in sockers rather than sockets. And then I noticed that there was a problem because I looked down here in the version of server that was running and it failed. So let me start that off again. Run server.js. Looks like it's running cleanly. Let's come back to our website. We'll go back one. We'll do a hard reload. Go back to our other one. Do a hard, just go back one. Do a hard reload. All right, and then we'll have Don join. Oh, and we had another crash. So let's see what happened. It says room undefined. Server received a command join room, and the room was undefined, and the username was Patterson. So that. Okay, so one bug that we've got is up here at the top of main.js in our get IRI parameter value. Realized that when we were looking for game ID, this was a situation where we often don't have the game ID. And if we don't have a game ID, we need to explicitly return null so that our code can recognize that we returned null so that we can then explicitly say that we have to use the lobby as our chat room. Save that. Okay, another bug that we've got is in server.js, the handler for join room. Come down after we check the payload, after we handle the command, and then once we begin to do the sockets, we need to make sure that this says constant member of sockets, not in sockets, but of sockets. If it says of sockets, it should work much better. All right, so in order to test it out, let's go ahead and reset our server and see it running down there. And then go back to our code and empty cache and hard reload. And again, what we're trying to do is see the message that the user has disconnected, and we want to see that smooth. So hard reload there. And we'll say Don enters on the left. And Patterson enters on the right. Great. We got Don and Patterson there. Looks like maybe I entered and departed. But now I want this Patterson, I want Patterson to depart, and I want to see a departed message show up on the left that's smooth. So let's see if it fades out or arrives and it's smooth. So that will indicate that we got the disconnected message and that we put it in there correctly. Great. Patterson left the lobby. There's one user in this room. Now, I don't like the fact that it's styled differently, but we'll tackle some styling in another recording. Okay, so that's it for chat room setup 2 of 3. We've got one more chunk that we need to do, and that last chunk is going to be to add the invite buttons. Now that we have smooth flowing of messages back and forth, we can add the invite buttons and get ready to invite people to the game. All right, thank you for your attention.